James, welcome back to the Pod Pit.
Hey, thanks for having me again.
The Show Me Institute Pod Pit. We're going to talk about something very, it's important to state economies. It's important to a certain group of people that are teachers. An issue that not well understood, which is teacher pensions. And as I said, I want to start off this podcast by making a declaration. You can join me or not. But Susan Pendergrass, Director of Research at the Show Me Institute, I can declare I do not want to take a pension from any teacher who's currently teaching or has retired from teaching. I just want to be 100% transparent. I want to take no one's pension.
Yeah, I also want no one's pension except for my wife's. She is actually vested in the public school retirement system of Missouri. So I would like hers.
You get to share hers.
Right, I'll share hers. But otherwise, I have no desire to take anyone's pension. That has never been my objective.
And that's a good thing because it's illegal.
Right.
If we did want to do that, we would want to do something that's illegal and runs counter to the state constitution. So it would be a losing battle.
Right.
Fortunately, I don't want to do that. And in that regard, I also, want to talk about Missouri. There was a bill this year to make a change to the teacher retirement system so that new teachers, if they wanted to, could opt to have a transportable retirement benefit like a 401k if they wanted to. If they thought maybe they weren't going to stay in Missouri forever, they weren't going to be a teacher forever, or whatever number of conditions, they could have chosen a defined contribution. And strong reaction to that. Oh,
very strong. So the lawmaker said he was basically getting hate mail. And I mean, it was an outpouring of opposition to it. They mobilized at the state capitol. I think for a moment we should take a step back and describe what the current system is, and then describe this potential alternative that was proposed this session and might be proposed again in the future. I don't know what the cards hold, but I mean, when we talk about a pension, we're talking about a defined benefit pension that doesn't take into account how much you put in, right? So the way it works is it's based on a formula. It multiplies for teachers how long you worked, so your number of years of service, your final average salary, which is just your 3 highest consecutive years. Typically, it's the end of your career, right? Your 3 highest consecutive years, and a multiplier, which it's typically 2.5% if you are fully retired. So you multiply those things out. And so for a person who works 30 years, you're talking about them getting a 75% of their final salary every year for the rest of their life, guaranteed. That's a defined benefit pension.
Right. And it's a payment that they get. It's not something they own.
Right.
When they die, it doesn't go on to their estate. It's a payment that they get. And for the ability to get that payment, they give up part of their paycheck.
Right. The teachers in Missouri, well, we have 3 different systems. So we typically just talk about PSRs, which is the big system. We have 3 systems, really. We have one, and that's a whole another issue that we might get into. Oh, you're telling me 4.
Kansas City and St. Louis have their own?
Yeah, Kansas City, St. Louis, and then the rest of the state.
And then the PSRs and the PSRs.
Oh, yeah.
Right.
Well, but for certified teachers,
sure.
Right, you have Kansas City has their own, St. Louis has its own, and then everywhere else has its own.
Right.
And they pay in PSRs, they pay 14.5% of their salary, and that's matched by another 14.5%. I should say, it's not just on their salary, it's also on the value of their benefits. So if you calculate in the value of their benefits, I mean, you're really looking at more than 30% of their salary is going into a retirement account, not their own retirement account, a pool, right? So it's like everyone in the state dumps their money into one big pool, and then you don't get back what you put in. Sure. You get back based on that formula. And at the end of your career, you might be a winner or you might be a loser. If you have a high final average salary, let's say you became a superintendent and you were making $200,000. Winner, right? Like you worked for 20 years as a teacher, became a principal, then became a superintendent, retired. Winner, you're making lots of money there that you did not put enough in to cover that.
Sure.
Whereas if you're a teacher and you leave early, or you just stay a teacher and you never really get master's degrees, you don't get large raises, you might be a big loser and you might have put more money in. You're paying for that superintendent's retirement.
Right.
You put more in than you're actually ever going to get out of it.
And then just to not get into the weeds, but the way the public pensions work is they're required to put in enough money to pay for all the retirement benefits, but actually only 80% of what they owe, right? Like, so you're not fully covering the cost of the retirees right now. You're partially covering it. And I hear that Missouri's plan is incredibly healthy because they have 83% of what they need. They don't have 100%, but they have 83%, and lots of patting themselves on the back for that 83%.
Yeah, 80 is a target. So, I mean, there's no real requirement on how much they have to have in, but their target is to be around 80%. I mean, really, I think you should want it to be 100% fully funded, because what you're saying is we're making a promise to these individuals who are vested that you are guaranteed this retirement benefit for the rest of your life. So that's a guarantee, a promise that we're making. Nothing that you or I do is going to change that, right? Like, that is there, and it's going to be paid out. So that's an obligation that the pension system has. And so then they have to determine how much money they need to be putting in now to cover those future benefits. And they use a formula to calculate that. They have actuaries that calculate it, and that's how they came up with the 14.5% contribution rate. It was much lower. It's been pretty stable for several years now, but it used to be 10%. It used to be less than that, right? So they decide how much they're going to put in, then they invest money and try to seek large returns, and they calculate based on their assumed rate of return,
which is
I think right now they're assuming 7.75.
I think it's 7.25.
Is it?
I could be wrong.
It was 8, just
north of 7.
Right.
They assume every year in, year out, recessions, booms, doesn't matter. They'll get at least 7%.
Right, and it was 8% just about 3 years ago or something like that. They've been lowering it, partly because of pressure from us and actuaries. But they also, it's not just when they're forecasting out what their interest rates are going to be or their returns on their investment. They also do it backwards from the future, right? So they take how much they think they're going to owe people in the future. I'm talking with my hands for people who are listening. So yeah. I'm pointing.
I'm getting a very clear picture.
I'm pointing to the future. They calculate back from the future, and they use what's called a discount rate, and they use a similar discount rate to bring it to current dollars to figure out how much we need today to pay for those future benefits. And so there's a problem here. So the private sector is governed by different laws. They have to use a corporate bond yield to do this discount rate, which is around 4%, right? They can't use 7%, 8% to calculate these things. And so right now, if you look through the PSRs annual report, they'll tell you that they're about 83% funded, and they have over $7 billion in unfunded liabilities. And they say, hooray, we're doing a great job.
Just $7 billion.
Only $7 billion.
Some of them are much, much worse.
Right. We're doing great. But if you actually calculate it using a corporate bond yield, which Andrew Biggs has done for the Show Me Institute, it's really $27 billion unfunded, right? Like, I mean, that's
realistic.
That's huge. And that's what this corporate bond yield, the reason that's there is it's a hedge against risk, because what we're doing is we're projecting out well into the future, and we're betting on our children, on our grandchildren's future, what we think the markets are going to do. Well, we should be cautious when we do that. We should calculate what risks might be involved, and that's why they encourage people to use those lower interest rates, lower discount rates, and PSRs doesn't do that. So when they say, oh, we're doing great, it's like, healthy. You're doing great with really rosy projections.
Okay, so a little bit about what they were going to try to do in this bill. And before I get into that, I want to be very clear that there are different types of teachers. There are college students graduating this month who are going to be teachers. Mm-hmm. There's future teachers. There are new teachers who are in the system for less than the vesting period, which I think is 10 years.
5 years. 5
years. Teachers who have been in the teaching profession for less than 5 years, and so they're paying into the plan, but they're not vested. So their part that the employer is putting in for them doesn't belong. They don't get to take that with them. Mm-hmm. Then there are teachers who are vested and haven't retired, and then there's retired teachers. And this particular bill is targeted at one of those groups, which are the teachers who have not started teaching yet. Mm-hmm. And part of it, I think, maybe you know more than I do, part of it was to get our financial house in order on what we're promising in these legacy costs, but also the teaching profession has changed. There's a recognition that these younger people may not either be in teaching forever or be in Missouri forever, and it would be to their benefit to do it, right?
Right. Yeah, I think you could ask, like, what's the problem here? Some people will say, oh, we're doing fine, leave us alone.
Exactly.
What's the problem you're trying to fix? It isn't broken. It's like, well, there are lots of parts that are broken. I mean, first off, we've got the unfunded liabilities that we just talked about, which it's not going to impact us right now, but it could down the road. I mean, This could be a big issue down the road. We've seen other states, other cities, where pensions have caused them essentially to go bankrupt. Yep. And that's a possibility if things don't get fixed. So that's one issue. Another issue we have is, we mentioned already, Kansas City, St. Louis, and the rest of the state are in different systems. So if you teach in St. Louis and then move to Clayton, or you teach in Clayton and move to St. Louis, or whichever way you go, you're moving between systems, and you're going to get two teachers. If one worked 30 years in one system and one worked 30 years but did 15 in each system, the one who worked 15 in each system would get about half as much in their benefit than the other teacher who worked 30 years, right? So the system punishes people who leave.